Measuring, counting, proving. That's what real science is all about. Or is it? Well, maybe not always. What if this image of science doesn't quite cover everything, and by holding on to it too tightly, you end up missing out on some really important perspectives? In this video, we're going to take a closer look at what positivism is really all about. We'll explore why it's been so influential in shaping how we think about science, what its strengths are, and why it's not the final word on what counts as real research. And now, without further ado, welcome to Shribe. What is positivism? Positivism is a philosophical perspective on science. It's based on the belief that true reliable knowledge must come from objective, observable, and measurable facts. Anything subjective, like opinions, emotions, or personal beliefs, is excluded since it can't be clearly verified. The idea goes all the way back to Auguste Comte. In the 19th century, he wanted to apply the same systematic methods used in the natural sciences to study social phenomena. For Comte, science had to be grounded in clear rules, measurable data, and neutral observation. And that influence is still with us today. Positivism is deeply embedded in a wide range of disciplines, not just in the natural sciences, but also in fields like medicine, psychology, and business studies. Business research, for example, started out with a strong positivist foundation, although it's become more diverse and open to other approaches over time. Even in the natural sciences, the ideal of pure objectivity is increasingly being questioned and re-evaluated. What counts as scientific? Positivism has had a huge impact on how we define science. Objectivity, measurability, transparency, reproducibility. For many people, these are still the gold standard of scientific work. But is that really the whole picture? For a long time, this view led to other kinds of knowledge being dismissed as unscientific. Things like personal experience, cultural interpretations, or emotional insight. Especially in the 20th century, scholars in the humanities and social sciences began to push back. They started asking, is measurability really the most important thing? Or do we need a broader understanding of how knowledge is actually created? Today, more and more people agree. There isn't just one way to generate insight. Subjective experiences, historical narratives, and cultural contexts can all contribute valuable knowledge, as long as they're approached systematically and transparently. And this question isn't just academic, it has real consequences for how you study. The methods you choose, the texts you cite, how you build your arguments, all of that reflects your own understanding of what science is. For example, if you design a controlled experiment or conduct interviews, you're actively choosing a certain stance on what counts as valid scientific work. Positivism in quantitative research. In quantitative research, positivist thinking is still the standard, with only a few exceptions. The goal here is to test hypotheses, evaluate theories using numbers. In other words, statistical methods, and draw general conclusions from objective data. Here's an example. You want to find out whether students who study more often in the library tend to get better grades. So you collect measurable data, like how often they visit the library and what their GPA is. And you run a statistical analysis to check for a correlation. What doesn't come into play here? Personal impressions, individual motivations, or emotional states. In fact, subjective factors are usually seen as potential sources of error, confounding variables, and are often controlled for. And that's where the limitation lies. Positivism works great for things that are clearly measurable. But how do you measure something like motivation, anxiety, or trust? How do you put numbers to love or grief? That's exactly where the critique of positivism begins. Qualitative research, a different approach. And this is where qualitative research comes in. It follows a completely different logic, and often picks up right where positivism leaves off. Qualitative studies aren't about numbers, they're about meaning, about experiences, perspectives, emotions. The goal isn't to measure, it's to understand. Researchers use interviews, observations, or group discussions to interpret phenomena from the point of view of those involved. The world isn't seen as something to be measured, but as complex, subjective, and deeply dependent on context. That's why many qualitative approaches are grounded in interpretivist or constructivist worldviews, not positivist ones. That said, not all qualitative research is strictly anti-positivist. Some methods, like certain types of qualitative content analysis, are so systematic and rule-based that they actually borrow from positivist thinking. Take intercoder reliability, for example. That's a metric that shows how consistently a team of researchers has analyzed qualitative data, where theory meets practice. And this clash of approaches can lead to real tension in practice. I often work with qualitative methods myself because they allow me to explore the complexity and subjectivity of the topics I care about. But in many academic fields, or when dealing with certain reviewers, quantitative positivist approaches are still seen as more valid or rigorous. That can cause real challenges, whether you're submitting a research proposal, applying for funding, or writing your thesis. Is positivism still relevant today? Even though many principles of positivism are still in use, the question is becoming more urgent. Is this scientific worldview still enough? Especially in the social sciences, the ideal of objective, neutral observation is being challenged. Because researchers aren't robots. Like it or not, they bring their own background, cultural experiences, and personal perspectives into the research process. Epistemological approaches like feminism or standpoint theory argue that objectivity doesn't mean pretending to be neutral. It means being honest and transparent about your own perspective. That's why positivism is often criticized in fields like gender studies or post-colonial theory. It can allow dominant perspectives to be framed as neutral, while other voices are pushed aside or left unheard. Mixed methods, the best of both worlds. So what if working only with numbers feels too limited, but relying solely on interviews seems too subjective? Maybe you need both. That's exactly what mixed methods offer. This approach combines quantitative and qualitative techniques, for example, starting with a survey and then following up with interviews to dig deeper into the results. From a traditional positivist point of view, that might seem unconventional, but modern research design embraces both paradigms, using the precision of numerical data and the depth of subjective insights. This is especially useful when you're dealing with complex research questions, the kind that involve both patterns and meaning. The important thing is to clearly explain why you're using both methods and to develop a solid strategy for how they work together. What does this mean for your research? If you're working on an empirical research project right now, here are 3 key questions to ask yourself. Do you want to uncover measurable relationships? Then a quantitative positivist approach is for you. Do you want to understand subjective perspectives? Go with a qualitative interpretive approach. Want both? Use a mixed methods design. The better you understand your own research goals, the easier it'll be to choose the right method and the right scientific framework for your project and for who you are as a researcher. And your argument will be that much more convincing. So, what do you think? Should science stay grounded in positivism, or is it time to embrace more pluralism? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.